I'm not a GTA guy, and to be quite honest, I don't much care for GTA 6. But having followed movements like Stop Killing Games and this whole PlayStation going digital thing for a while now, you know, the one where they decided to stop selling you physical discs forever and ever, potentially opening the door to them just deleting the games from existence and yoinking them away from your game library, like the thing they did with the movies, just like that. Something like CyberLeaks, yes, that is indeed a cyberpunk onion leak, something like CyberLeaks seemed to be inevitable. So I wasn't really shocked when any of this happened. And even though I cannot fully support something as extreme as what the CyberLeaks people have been doing, nor do I also call for them to get arrested, this needs to happen to the gaming industry. So let's talk about it. Welcome back, I'm Inigo, and this whole CyberLeak situation is insane. First things first, what actually happened? CyberLeak, what this group of hackers is calling themselves, hacked Rockstar and got themselves anywhere from test footage to actual working builds of GTA 6, and are threatening to leak the entire game to try and cause irreparable financial damage to Rockstar itself, and then threatening the gaming industry as a whole. Primarily on AAA studios and publishers. Why, you may wonder. Well, simply put, the state of AAA games and its current business model has gotten so bad in the last decade, so bad that releasing incomplete, rushed, broken games that need multiple patches has become the norm, and there's an abundance of microtransactions and over-monetization baked into these new games. All in all, the industry has leaned into becoming way too anti-consumerist in its practices, which I personally would consider as hostile even, where they've designed the business model that extracts as much money from the customer while providing the least value in return, which, okay, that is standard business procedure. Don't lie to me and tell me you wouldn't consider that kind of math on some level if you were to get into business yourself, min-maxing and all, but they're doing all of this while charging a premium and setting the standard for the industry at large. It's kind of like buying a sports car and getting a shit overpriced car with no prestige or status bump, aka no chicks on your dick, and they make sure to overcharge you for everything. And moving forward, it seems like you won't even get to own your car anymore. Only have the license to use it or like lease it, despite the language being used to sell you the car as sale, which implies ownership. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What did CyberLeak actually say all this was for, officially speaking? Fortunately, they released an official edict. That's how they phrase it. We'll go through that first and then I'll give a few more thoughts and break it down a bit more. It starts off showing its disappointment with the gaming industry and how much it over-monetized games while disguising purchases of products as what is essentially leases or selling licenses, shipping unfinished games and calling them live services and locking away content and then calling them DLC. Basically gating the experience as much as possible, which, okay, expansions did exist back then, but those were actually separate things that were made way after the fact. This is modern AAA studios already giving you the files and then just locking them through a code that you cannot unlock unless you buy it, which you're gonna sell either as a pre-order bonus or a few weeks after, like a month after, right? The DLC is already in your computer or like your console. They're just locking it away with using paywalls. But keep in mind, they're selling the product as a full experience. So in practice, what should have been like $60 to $70 ends up being something like $120 for like the complete gaming experience, all in all. They end this first part explicitly stating that it gets worse and worse every year, with gamers getting less and less for what they pay. And as someone who is well insulated from all this AAA bullshit, being mostly on like the indie stuff and retro games, I can see that whenever I dip my toes into the AAA stuff every now and then. The next part just states that they're doing this crypto project on the side to help fund this operation, explicitly stating that it's not a cash grab, which, while my bullshit meter is up, when your movement hinges upon business ethics and taking the moral good high ground, chaotic good but still on the good quadrant all the same, there has to be some truth to that statement. But this is not financial advice, so if you are interested in this, don't be stupid, do your own research. Basically, crypto to fund all of this, and I believe you buy votes on what gets leaked, and that's sort of like how they, if ever I guess they get into legal trouble, that's how they're gonna pay this off, and obviously the equipment for hacking and stuff. The operations. But I can't know this for sure since I haven't looked into this at all. I have no interest in any of this. But if you want to, go ahead. Again, not financial advice in any capacity. And be aware that there are copycats out there hoping to cash in on gullible people who don't do their research well or at all. So you've been warned. But here's the real meat of it all, the 3 commandments that they say. First commandment, thou shalt not sell pre-orders. So no consumer shall pay for a game through digital storefronts before release and independent review. Physical pre-orders for tangible media remain permitted. Pre-orders were not created for gamers, they were created because physical discs had manufacturing limits. In digital distribution, there is no inventory, there is no stock shortage, a digital copy cannot sell out, which is true. Yet publishers kept the pre-order system and stripped away its only consumer benefit. Now gamers pay early and receive nothing in return except a countdown timer and a cosmetic skin. And I'm going to add to that, they usually get a broken game anyways that's rushed because these publishers want to release these certain games and deadline crunches and stuff. They go on to say that if publishers want revenue before launch, they can press discs, print boxes, put them on shelves, earn that money through physical production. Which, I'm going to break this down a bit more later on, but yeah, seems reasonable enough. Moving on to the second commandment, thou shalt not sell fake single-player DLC. So this is what I was talking about earlier. No publisher shall sell access to single-player content already present in the base game files the consumer purchased. No unlock keys, no 1 MB placeholder files, no toggling a variable from locked equals true to locked equals false for content already on the disc or in the download. When somebody pays USD $70 for a game, they bought the data, all of it. Selling them a file that flips locked equals true to locked equals false for a single player mission. Character, weapon, or story chapter is charging them twice for the same product. And I'm gonna agree with that. It's sort of like if you bought a car and it's like a wagon, and the wagon doesn't have seats with it. If you bought a wagon with seats at the back of it, like the very back of the car, like if at the time you exchanged the money for the car and it came with the seats, you should be able to use those seats. And this is the thing that I think, again, I don't really have much experience on AAA games, but in the few times that I do those things, I can tell that this is true because those games regularly ship at about 80 to like 100 plus gigs at a time. Smaller indie titles with a comparable single-player experience and campaign can do it with about 20 to 40 gigabytes max. So there's gotta be a bunch of files that's just in there that isn't really activated. And then they're just hosting it on your PC or console and then just activating it when you've bought it. It's super sketchy. And we're gonna move on to the third commandment. Thou shalt preserve single-player content. This is probably the biggest one. For me, any game featuring single-player content must include an offline fallback state. When server support ends, the publisher must release a final patch that unlocks all single-player content for local, indefinite play. The Crew had a single-player campaign, people paid full price, then Ubisoft shut down the servers and the entire game died, including the solo content. No refund, patches, or alternatives were given by Ubisoft. Single-player content depends on one thing, the hardware the consumer already owns. Breaking it when servers go down is theft. This I 100% agree with. The Crew, the game that they cited over here, was sold as a full game. It's a racing game, but it's not like a racing. It was an open world racing game that takes place on like a miniaturized map of the US. So you're basically driving around the US, and it was a good time. When the servers were shut down, which was the only way that you could play this game through, they didn't provide any kind of offline play. So even if you were to just play the game, single player, no other friends on the server or anything like that, if you wanted to have the experience of like doing a short road trip across the US, you couldn't do that. And what's worse is that you paid full price for this game that was effectively treated as a free MMO. And I know the tech for that does exist because one of the games I still have that also Ubisoft shut down the servers for is Rainbow Six Vegas 2. I have a lot of fond memories playing that with my friends, and the difference is that even though the servers are offline, there is a function where you can play games locally or like through a virtual LAN, and you can still play certain parts of that game mode with your friends. And that still exists regardless of whether their server exists or not. And on top of that, Rainbow Six Vegas 2 still has an incredible single player campaign, which for the Crew doesn't actually exist anymore. It's basically dead. Even if you were to pirate the game, it wouldn't work. Moving on, they end on two things, a final word and a warning. 3 commandments are the floor, not the ceiling, and if publishers violate these, they will be targeted with leaks, and nothing but concrete action plans will stop these. Fairly reasonable, I think. And then with a warning, if they can reach Rockstar, basically no one is safe because year on year the industry has been changing what it meant to own a game, and even though it wasn't explicitly stated, I believe Sony going digital only has been the final straw, and CYBERLEEK believes that the industry has finally crossed that line, which this whole thing is a response to that. Alright, so what are my thoughts on all of this? Obviously highly illegal. On paper, this seems uncalled for and a bit excessive, but if you actually look into the finer details, like, I don't know, you start to see where I'm seeing things, and I think that, yeah, maybe this does need to happen. I won't be cheering on these guys or financially support them in that crypto thing in any capacity. Again, crypto's not my thing, but I will watch them closely and try to enjoy the chaos from afar, because it is, I do think it's about time that maybe AAA companies get actually checked. Because on top of releasing shitty games that nobody wants to play and selling them overpriced so that they lose money year on year, any business consultant, which I have some experience on, any self-respecting business consultant in their right mind would tell them to start unfucking themselves immediately or else they're going to go under, and that they still persist, which shows how much money there is in this whole thing. And yet not only do they keep making these mistakes, they keep doubling down on these bad business practices, spitting in the face of logic, and they're the only ones doing this. I know that because what they're doing isn't a thing in the indie space or like with smaller studios where there's less money, higher risk, smaller companies, and games are actually tested on how good or bad they are. Like if a game is good, it will sell. If a game is bad, it won't sell. If a game is alright, it will just sell alright. Indie studios and small publishers understand what would happen and how quickly they would go out of business if they kept doing things like the AAA studios are getting away with. In these smaller companies, these indie studios, they're making games exactly how games used to be made. You know, the game that you were passionate about was not good enough and didn't sell enough copies. Too bad. Not only are you not getting paid, the company's also going bankrupt. Or what's that? We made an unexpected hit that people actually like. Guess your stock options in the company are actually going to pay off because we're going to the moon with this. You know, these smaller studios, they understand you start with a good product first and then the money comes after. The AAA studios are, the way they're structured, at least based on my understanding, a lot of these things are dictated by stakeholders and people who just want money and don't care about how they make it, which is via the games. That's just a completely broken system that I think eventually these smaller indie studios, when they do get bigger, they're going to eventually go on this path, but I think we're not there yet, at least for the most part. Because again, completely different business models. Indie studios actually have to sell games, they have to ship out complete games, and they have to make sure that they work. AAA studios and publishers, on the other hand, have gotten so big that they can just strong-arm both the industry and its consumers with money, and they've been getting away with this for far too long. And I think until now, until CYBERLEEK checked them in the most over-the-top way, which is 3 months before the release of GTA 6, they're threatening to leak the game. And I think last night, or a few days ago from when I'm recording this, they actually tweeted the end credits of GTA 6. And even though there's been like 1 billion in pre-sales already, if they leak this, if they actually do leak GTA 6, because Rockstar or Take-Two, I think, is studio, just wouldn't listen to the consumers or like their customers. I don't know, things are gonna be very interesting. Now you might be wondering, with all my shit talking on AAA studios, are there actually cases where companies actually take care of their customers? And outside of the indie space, are there companies that actually do the things that CYBERLEEK demands AAA studios to do? Or like gaming companies as a whole, but we know this is for AAA studios. Again, quick recap. Commandment 1, not selling digital pre-orders. Commandment 2, not selling fake single-player DLCs. And Commandment 3, preserving single-player content. Well, digital pre-orders, I don't think, and this might be a bit controversial, I don't think it's that big of an issue as long as you package it right. As someone on the consumer side, to me, if I were, and I don't, but if I were to get a digital pre-order, it's going to be mostly on the convenience of not, dealing with the server shutting down or like Steam going down on the day itself, and just making sure that when the game releases, I have a copy of it in my library. I think that is fairly reasonable, but when it gets abused by a lot of companies where they're using it as a scarcity tactic, which, by the way, when GTA 6 pre-orders came out, there were scalpers selling digital pre-orders. I'd like to take a moment to let you sit with the fact that there are people out there whose vote probably holds the same weight as yours, who genuinely thinks that digital pre-orders are gonna run out. Yeah, that's the thing that happened. So as long as it's packaged right, I think pre-orders are reasonable. You do get some kind of discount, I think. But if they're just using that for artificially inflating the scarcity of it all, and when they're doing it when there are no reviews, there's barely anything to go off of it other than maybe like a few promo materials, you have no idea what you're actually getting into, yeah, that's going to be problematic. But I think most companies are on the good side of that thing. Now, with regards to selling fake single-player DLCs and not preserving single-player content, I think the bigger issue here is the fact that When you're playing single player games, you are just playing it by yourself. Again, like they said in their edict, all you need is your hardware, and I'd say electricity. So we're going to play this without electricity, but I digress. To play a single player game, you just need the files and your time, and that is it. As someone who's been digging into my retro games backlog, I can say that that's night and day. Completely different experience from modern gaming where everything's up in the servers and you need everything connected to online, even though you're the only one playing that game and you don't need the internet for any kind of access on that. As for commandment number 2, I think this is largely an issue on managing their timelines and product releases. At least one of the good things that changed in the gaming industry was the active reduction, or like the active efforts to reduce crunch time, and although that still happens, I'm sure. But Commandment 2 really goes back into releasing a finished product when you need it to. A lot of games have been rushed, and that's why they come out broken and untested and highly unoptimized, and to me that reeks more of an organizational issue rather than like a product issue itself. Like, you aren't able to produce these games finished on time because you can't manage your resources and your people properly and on time as well. And I don't know what this is supposed to look like, but I think in the end, we just have to be very aware of what we're paying for, and we get what we actually pay for. So if it's being marketed as a $60 game, it should be a $60 complete experience, and not actually it's $45 right now, and then we're going to give you the remaining $15 in 2 to 3 months when we finish this DLC that, by the way, the files are already in your system. You just have to activate them and stealthily update those files when they're ready, and then when that happens, guess what? A few months later, you get your full $60 game. It shouldn't work like that. If you paid $60 now, you should get a $60 worth product, full game, when you've paid for it, and not sort of like this promise that may or may not come in the future. One of the ways that the indie games side is doing this is through early access, which I think a lot of people have some well-deserved fatigue from that, because a lot of games are released as unfinished slop, let's be real here. But there are cases like in Valheim where they did release something that was early access. It blew up, so obviously they had a lot of funding from that. And then they just took their time to slowly fill in the biomes over the course of a few years, and then now I think by the end of the year, they'd have like a full version 1.0 or like complete Valheim game from start to finish. But they're only doing that because they don't have the money and the resources, like the manpower and the equipment to do all of this, because they're a small studio. AAA studios, on the other hand, have multiple offices across the world with tens of thousands of employees, and you're telling me that smaller studios are able to outperform these bigger companies? It makes no sense. And with regards to the third commandment on game preservation, some big studios are actually doing a good thing. Konami, for example, I know they did our boy dirty all those years ago, but with their official re-releases of Castlevania and the old Metal Gear Solid games, I know the Castlevania games could have been better as like an actual remaster, and I know you can just get some basic Game Boy emulator and get ROMs for the Game Boy Advance games and then just have a good time right there. But then the fact that they packaged all of the Game Boy Advance Castlevania games, Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, and then Aria of Sorrow, released it as one package, sold it as one release, so we get 3 games in one. It works on all modern systems and consoles perfectly. That in and of itself is already good enough. But then they go a bit further and re-release the DS games in modern systems, which, I don't know if you know this, but emulating DS games is very hard, particularly because of the screen orientation and like how unique the setup is, where you have one screen that's just a regular screen and then another screen that maybe has some touch features. The fact that they were able to repackage all of that into something that just works and works so well. I think the Dominus collection, the DS games, is being cited as the best example of game preservation, because not only do you get the exact same DS games but now on PC or Switch or Steam Deck or whatever. I was able to play it on my phone using Game Native, but that's neither here nor there. The fact that you can just have that easily accessible, and they made quality of life improvements. That's how companies should be treating all of these things. Now that could have been a perfect opportunity to like maybe upgrade the experience and make the DS games sort of like a bit more comparable to Symphony of the Night, because Symphony of the Night, I think visually still holds up really well, and it just has a better soundtrack with like I think voice acting too. The voice acting is completely gone from the Dominus collection, I think, and so if they reworked it into something that works like that, and then they made it into like a full widescreen, and so they ditched the whole additional screens on the side, that would have been a lot more work. Honestly, preserving it as is, as the DS experience, but then making it playable for most systems, what more could you ask for? Because what most companies do is they just leave them and just hope that the few people who are actually playing these games wouldn't complain or like would just shut up, like what they did with The Crew. Ubisoft is notoriously like the biggest offender of this, because don't get me started on Ubisoft and their broken launchers for old Assassin's Creed games. Like, those games had to work with an Ubisoft launcher that no longer exists and they no longer maintain, and yet somehow they can't seem to patch out using those broken launchers, and then they make it a requirement for the game to actually also run those broken launchers. I mean, the older copy of Black Flag will just hang on the main menu when you're booting the game because it tries to connect to servers that don't exist anymore. Assassin's Creed Unity has co-op missions that, I mean, this goes more into game design, but it has co-op missions that are very difficult as a single player run, and you can only get some weapons and armor via co-op that you can't realistically 100% that game fully. As a matter of fact, when I played Prince of Persia Forgotten Sands earlier this year, I had to pirate a PS3 version of the game myself, even though I have the copy on Steam and that works fine. The problem is there was this game-breaking bug that happens that's tied to the FPS, that because it was locked to 30 FPS and now we have obviously upgraded to like 60 FPS or like 120 FPS. I was playing it on my Steam Deck at 40 FPS. There's a bug that happens later on in the game that will basically break your save because there's this lever for like this puzzle that won't spawn, and they haven't patched that out. And yet if you go on Steam, I mean, yeah, sure, it's not $60 anymore, but they still sell that as a product that works, and yet it clearly doesn't. And they don't patch that out. There's no upkeep or maintenance in any of these games, especially when they age out, and yet these studios still regularly sell them as complete games. And I think this is really the heart of the matter here. I believe that the gaming industry, again, the AAA studios and publishers in particular, has a fundamentally broken business model, and CyberLeek exists right now as a checking entity, an answer to that broken system, that until they actually fix their ways, because the legal systems aren't really, I mean, the EU is doing a few things on their end, but no legal entity is going after these games that are basically predatory and anti-consumer, and year on year they're getting more and more anti-consumer. And so, yes, this needs to happen, even though I think it is quite excessive, but what's the alternative? Right now, what it's doing is it's pruning the rot away, or like reshaping the bonsai tree, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do and it doesn't grow wild and weird and all destroys the garden, right? Because the alternative is a full-on gaming industry collapse where everyone loses. And by everyone, I mean everyone with money involved in it. Because the consumers, aka us, ultimately we will be the winners in all of this. Like, to us, obviously, the game industry crashed like a few times before. And I think it was Nintendo in that 8-bit era that actually restored faith in these game companies, because gaming companies were just making slop and then more or less the same thing that they're doing now, where they're just extracting the money from all of us and then just giving us shit products that nobody wants to play. And so for us, the gaming industry won't really go away. All this will ever be to us is a reset, which means for like a good few years or like a decade or so, we're not going to have these big AAA games. That's really going to be it for us, but we're not going to have no games at all. Like, it won't be a gaming apocalypse. And I think companies need to understand that, because we do have alternatives, and they're called smaller studios and indie developers. They exist. They actually make a lot of good games that the mainstream gamer just isn't going to have any sort of like access or visibility on. And they're also able to make better games for like a fraction of a price, in both the price of you paying for those games as the consumer and also the price of making those games. So they're just going to be next in line. And once these AAA companies go out, these smaller companies can actually start buying up some of the IP, like, I don't know, Gears of War, Halo, maybe even Sonic. Maybe not Sonic, but you get my point. They might buy up some of these IPs and start releasing new games within that franchise, because really, the only cards that AAA studios have at this point are the fact that they have good graphics, but only because they have like that big of a manpower pool to actually like sculpt all of these intricate 3D models, and also the IPs. They own the IPs, but that's really it. Those are essentially all the cards that they have. Again, I believe CyberLeek isn't, just about any single one topic like zero game preservations or shipping out incomplete copies, but all of the issues and abuses that these big companies are making, where the rules of this transaction has slowly changed into them, extracting more money from you in exchange of less of a product and being sold at a premium, and you're not even going to own the games moving forward. I think that's really the big issue here, and CyberLeek is AAA Studios' reckoning. Or maybe this is just Rockstar's marketing team. I don't fucking know. Okay, quick update. I'm recording this while I'm editing the video a few hours before Rockstar pushes through with the trailer on Netflix. And a few things have happened. Number one, I think they're closing in on CYBERLEEK. Maybe, maybe not. Nobody knows for sure, but there's this one guy who at least did some OSINT and gave that info to Rockstar. Whether CYBERLEEK or if that's a whole team will get taken down, I don't know for sure. So I'm just pointing it out there. And also, Rockstar finally addressed the whole thing, urging fans of GTA to just wait and try to avoid the spoilers. That's what happened. I don't know if by the time the video goes up, this will all be over, but my thought still stands. I think this does need to happen, and yeah, it's a good wake-up call for the industry, because as you can see right here, there are still people who don't really understand the gravity of the entire situation. Anyways, that's going to be it for me for this one. What do you think about the CYBERLEEK situation or the AAA gaming industry? Do you think CYBERLEEK is justified in all of this, or are AAA studios and publishers the real victims here? Do you even know that indie games exist? Let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, check out the other stuff in my channel, and if you'd like to sub, consider turning on the bell notification so you'll know every time I upload. I am Inigo, signing off for now. Bye!